Holden slammed the SUV into park so hard, Vanessa's coffee splashed across the dashboard. Another section of the mansion's roof collapsed into the front yard, and the workers never even slowed down. "Stop!" Holden shouted as he jumped out. "That's my house." The excavator kept moving. Not one person looked up. Then Holden saw Camille Reynolds. She was sitting beneath the old oak tree across the street, both hands resting quietly on the steering wheel of a black sedan. She wasn't on her phone. She wasn't talking to anyone. She was simply watching. The moment Holden recognized her, the panic on his face gave way to something else. Confusion. He started toward her instead of the house. "Camille." She met his eyes. For just a second. Then she looked away. She never looked back. Another crash echoed behind him as the front porch gave way. But neither of them moved. Vanessa hurried after Holden, her voice trembling. "Holden, why isn't anybody stopping them?" Before he could reach Camille, two company security officers stepped onto the sidewalk and began walking directly toward him. Neither of them looked at the house. "Welcome to Greer Stories, my amazing family. Whether you're new here or already part of the family, I'm truly grateful you're here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and as the story unfolds, tell me what you would have done if you were in their shoes." If you enjoy stories like these, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video. Every like, comment, and share helps these stories reach more people who may enjoy them, relate to them, or even learn something from them. And if you haven't already, subscribe and officially become part of our storytelling family. Now, let's step into today's story. The older of the two officers stopped in front of Holden and held out his hand. "Mr. Carter, I need your company phone." Holden stared at him, then back at the house. "My house is being demolished." The officer didn't argue. He didn't even glance at the collapsing roof. He simply waited. The second officer stepped forward and handed Holden a sealed envelope with his name printed neatly across the front. Before Holden could ask another question, his cell phone vibrated. Then again, he looked at the screen. Chairman of the board. Corporate counsel. Emergency executive session. More notifications appeared before he could read the first. Vanessa looked from the envelope to the officers, then across the street. "Holden." "Oh." Her voice was barely audible. "I don't think this is about the house." Across the street, Camille started her car. She didn't wave. She didn't roll down the window. She simply drove away. Holden watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner. Only then did he look down at the unopened envelope in his hand. 15 years later, he would remember this as the day everything fell apart. The truth was, it had started 15 years earlier, inside that same house, when two people made promises they believed would outlast anything life could put in their way. 15 years earlier, Camille Reynolds carried the same worn leather notebook everywhere she went. One afternoon, as she settled into a business strategy class, the student beside her glanced at the cracked leather cover and smiled. "You seriously still use that old thing?" Camille slipped it gently onto her desk. "It still has a few things to teach me." He chuckled, thinking she was kidding. She wasn't. The notebook was the last gift her father had ever placed in her hands. Its pages weren't filled with formulas or motivational quotes. They held mistakes, questions, and lessons he had written after decisions that affected other people's lives. Near the front, one sentence had been underlined twice. "True success is measured by the number of lives that become better because of your decisions." A few pages later, another line had a small checkmark beside it. "When pride becomes more important than people, good decisions rarely follow." Camille never read those words without hearing her father's voice. He led a respected logistics company in Belmead, but he measured success differently from almost everyone around him. One Friday evening, she found him wiping down the conference table after the employees had gone home. "The cleaning crew will be here soon," she said. "I know, so why are you doing it?" He folded the cloth and smiled. "Because someone has to care before they're paid to." As they stepped outside, they noticed one of the warehouse supervisors sitting alone in his truck. The engine was running. The truck wasn't moving. Camille's father tapped lightly on the window. "You haven't gone home." The man stared at the steering wheel for a long moment. "My daughter's having surgery tomorrow." His voice cracked. I've been trying to figure out which bills can wait." Without asking another question, Camille's father slipped a plain white envelope into his hand. The man looked down at it. "I can't promise when I can pay you back." "I'm not asking you to." After the truck disappeared down the road, Camille looked over. "You trusted him?" "I trusted that he needed help." She carried those words with her long after she stopped hearing them. A year later, cancer stole the easy conversations they used to have. On one of his stronger afternoons, he asked her to sit beside him. He picked up the notebook from the bedside table and rested it in her hands. "I've spent 30 years writing in this." She held it, but gently pushed it back. "I don't want it." He looked at her. "I want you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled. "I know." His hand covered hers. "One day, you'll wish you could ask me one more question." He nodded toward the notebook, so I filled it with the questions I wish I'd asked myself sooner. 6 weeks later, he was gone. The notebook never left Camille's bag again. It was with her on the morning of the Tennessee State Business Innovation Challenge. Students from across Tennessee filled the auditorium, all hoping to leave with recognition, investors, or both. One competitor seemed completely at ease with attention. Holden Carter. He stepped onto the stage without a single note in his hand. Confident, prepared, funny without trying too hard. By the time he finished, even the judges were smiling. Camille applauded with everyone else. He had earned it. Then the final challenge appeared on the screen. A successful family-owned manufacturer was losing money despite record sales. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Teams argued over pricing, shipping, and marketing. Someone bumped Camille's chair without noticing. She quietly opened her notebook. One sentence caught her eye. "Find the problem everyone else is walking around." She closed it and studied the financial reports again. Across the room, Holden stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. While everyone else was trying to be heard, she was the only person reading in complete silence. That caught his attention. He walked over. "You've been awfully quiet." Camille slid one spreadsheet toward him. "I think everyone's solving the wrong problem." He looked down. The confidence on his face gave way to concentration. Several seconds passed. Finally, he looked up. "I completely missed that. It hides in plain sight." He laughed at himself. "I've been confidently wrong for almost 10 minutes. I noticed. You could have rescued me sooner. You didn't ask." He smiled. "Fair enough." Together they rebuilt the entire presentation around the issue every other team had overlooked. An hour later, the judges announced them as the winners. The applause echoed through the auditorium. Holden accepted the trophy, then turned and handed it straight to Camille. "They're congratulating the wrong person," he said. "She found the answer." Camille laughed softly and handed it back. "We both found it." "No." He shook his head. "You helped me find what I wasn't looking for." For just a second, she didn't know whether he meant the solution or her. Outside the auditorium, Holden caught up with her before she reached the parking lot. "I still owe you coffee." Camille smiled. "I don't remember agreeing to that." "You didn't." He laughed. "I just figured it'd be easier to ask while you were still impressed with me." She laughed for the first time that day. "I was." He placed a hand over his chest. "Past tense already?" As they walked toward the parking lot, the leather notebook slipped from Camille's bag onto the sidewalk. Holden noticed before she did. He picked it up carefully and brushed away a little dust before handing it back. "I've never seen anyone carry the same notebook this long." Camille held it against her chest. "It reminds me who I want to be." Holden nodded thoughtfully. "I hope one day you tell me that story." She looked at him for a moment, then smiled. "I think I'd like that." Coffee became dinner. Dinner became weekends that never seemed long enough. Before either of them realized it, they had become the first person the other wanted to call with good news, and the only person who made bad days feel smaller. Holden proposed on an ordinary Tuesday. No restaurant, no photographer, no audience. He stood on the front porch of Camille's mother's house with a small ring box in his pocket and a smile that kept disappearing every time he tried to speak. "I practiced this," he admitted. I can tell. I forgot all of it. She laughed. So, what do you remember? He looked at her for a long moment. I keep trying to picture my life 10 years from now. She waited. You're in every version. Camille stepped closer and slipped her hand into his. I was hoping you'd say that. They married 6 months later. Neither of them cared much about having the biggest wedding. They cared about having the right marriage. 2 years later, they bought an aging estate in Belle Meade that every realtor politely described as full of potential. The first night there, the dining room echoed because there wasn't a single piece of furniture inside. Rain tapped against the old windows. Half the lights refused to work. They sat on the hardwood floor, eating pizza straight from the box. Holden looked around the empty room. We could have bought a house that didn't leak. Camille smiled. But then it wouldn't be ours. He looked up at the ceiling where another slow drip landed in a bucket. You really think we'll finish this place? She reached over and took his hand. We don't have to finish it today. We just have to keep coming home. That sentence quietly became the rhythm of their marriage. Weeknights meant paint on their clothes. Saturday mornings meant hardware stores. Sunday afternoons usually uncovered another surprise the home inspector had somehow missed. One evening, after spending hours trying to install a chandelier, Holden climbed down the ladder and stared at it. It leaned noticeably to one side. I have an MBA. Camille folded her arms. And yet... The chandelier disagrees. He laughed so hard, he had to sit down on the stairs. Years passed almost without either of them noticing. The mansion slowly became the home they had imagined. The company grew the same way, not through one breakthrough, but through hundreds of steady decisions made together. One afternoon, an executive meeting came to a standstill after someone suggested eliminating dozens of warehouse jobs to reduce costs. The room fell quiet. Holden studied the numbers. They're not wrong, he admitted. Camille looked at the spreadsheet a little longer. What happens to the families? Nobody answered. Holden slowly closed the folder. We'll find another way. They did. Months later, employees still talked about that meeting, not because jobs had been saved, but because they realized the company meant what it said about putting people first. As the business became more visible across Nashville, invitations, interviews, and magazine features became part of their routine. One afternoon, a local business magazine arrived to profile the company. The photographer smiled. Mr. Carter, we'd love to get a few photos before we begin. Camille instinctively stepped forward. The photographer hesitated. Just Holden is fine. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Holden looked toward Camille. She offered an encouraging smile. Go ahead. He took one step toward the camera, then stopped. He glanced back at the conference room door before quietly saying, Another pause. That doesn't feel right. The photographer looked confused. Camille gave his hand a gentle squeeze. It's okay. He searched her face for another second. Only then did he follow the photographer. When the interview ended, he found her organizing notes in her office. I should have insisted. She smiled without looking up. We've got bigger things to worry about. She believed that. He wanted to believe it too. That evening they sat together on the back porch while the porch lights slowly came on across the lawn they had spent years bringing back to life. Camille opened her father's notebook. Holden smiled. Can I read it someday? She rested her hand on the worn leather cover. Not yet. He nodded immediately. Whenever you're ready. She closed the notebook and set it beside her chair. Without thinking, Holden reached for her hand. She took it just as naturally. The porch grew quieter as the last light disappeared behind the trees. Neither of them noticed how effortless that simple habit had become. The first change wasn't an argument. It was a sentence. After another strong quarter, Holden and Camille walked into a downtown Nashville television studio for a live business interview. While the producer adjusted microphones, the host smiled. You've built one of Tennessee's fastest-growing companies. How did you two do it? Holden answered without thinking. When I started... He stopped for the briefest moment. We knew we'd have to earn people's trust before we earned their business. The interview continued. Neither of them mentioned it. Halfway back to the office, Camille looked out the passenger window. Did you notice something? Holden glanced over. What? You started with I. He frowned. Did I? For a second, he thought about it. I didn't even realize. She smiled gently. I know. The conversation ended there. At least, they both believed it had. Over the next several months, little things became easier to overlook than to discuss. A newspaper profile quoted Holden 3 times. Camille wasn't mentioned. At an industry banquet, someone congratulated Holden on his company. Holden smiled politely. Thank you. Camille waited. The correction never came. Driving home, he reached across the console and found her hand the way he always did. She held on just as naturally. She told herself success had simply become louder than the people inside it. That explanation felt kinder than any other she could imagine. One Monday morning, Camille walked into the executive conference room carrying a proposal she had spent weeks preparing. The company had reached a point where expanding into neighboring states finally seemed possible. Before she sat down, Holden looked up from his tablet. It already came together. She paused. What came together? The board meeting. She blinked. There was a board meeting? Friday afternoon. You never told me. He rubbed the back of his neck. It happened fast. Another pause. I figured I'd fill you in afterward. The room fell completely still. Camille looked around the table. No one met her eyes. She lowered herself into her chair, opened her notebook, and quietly crossed out 3 pages of notes she no longer needed. The meeting continued. Nobody acknowledged what had just happened. That evening, Holden found her sitting on the back porch. The notebook rested open beside her. He leaned against the railing. I've been thinking about today. So have I. I wasn't trying to leave you out. I believe you. I just thought... He searched for the words. It would be simpler. Camille looked down at the notebook. My father used to say something. Holden smiled faintly. I was wondering when he'd show up. She smiled too. He used to tell me. Be careful when saving time starts costing people. The words settled quietly between them. I don't think that's what I was doing. I don't think you do either. She reached over and took his hand. He squeezed it. Neither of them wanted the conversation to become an argument, so they let it become silence instead. A week later, a cream-colored envelope arrived from a national leadership conference. Holden opened it while Camille sorted the morning mail. He read the invitation once, then again. Without saying anything, he folded the letter and slipped it into his briefcase. Camille glanced at the envelope before returning to the stack in front of her. Neither of them mentioned the empty space where her name should have been. The first expense looked ordinary. Camille almost approved it without reading the details. A client dinner, downtown Nashville, nothing unusual. Then she noticed the guest listed beside the receipt. Vanessa Sinclair. She didn't recognize the name. She approved the reimbursement and moved on. 3 days later, it appeared again. Different restaurant, different amount, same name. By the end of the month, Vanessa Sinclair had become the one name Camille seemed to notice no matter how many reports crossed her desk. Boutique hotels, commercial property tours, private airport transportation, designer furniture showrooms. Every expense had supporting documents. Everything looked legitimate. Still, she carried the folder into Holden's office. Who's Vanessa? He looked up from his laptop. Vanessa Sinclair. He thought for a second. Oh, Vanessa. He leaned back in his chair. She's helping us evaluate commercial properties. We're looking at expanding faster than we expected. I don't think I've met her. You have. He smiled faintly. Remember the Chamber of Commerce dinner? Blonde hair, blue dress. Camille searched her memory, then nodded. The real estate consultant. That's her. His phone vibrated across the desk. He glanced at the screen. I need to grab this. It's okay. He stepped into the hallway. The office door never fully closed. Camille could hear his voice. She couldn't make out the words. When he returned a few minutes later, he smiled. So, dinner at home? She smiled back. That sounds nice. The folder stayed exactly where she had left it. Weeks slipped by. Holden traveled more. Some mornings his side of the bed was already empty. Some nights she heard the garage door long after she'd fallen asleep. When she stirred, he always whispered the same thing. "Sorry. Long day." She always answered the same way. "I know." Their anniversary arrived on a Thursday. For years they had celebrated at the same quiet restaurant overlooking the Cumberland River. The hostess smiled when Camille walked in. "Your table is ready." She glanced toward the entrance. "He'll be here." The waiter filled 2 glasses with water. She thanked him. 20 minutes later, he stopped by again. "Would you like to order while you're waiting?" She smiled politely. "I'll give him another few minutes." Outside, daylight slowly faded from the windows. At 8:31, her phone lit up. "Running late. I'm so sorry. Rain check?" She looked at the message, locked her phone, then looked back toward the door one last time. The waiter returned quietly. "Can I bring you anything?" Camille smiled. "The check, please." When she reached home, the flowers Holden had ordered that morning were still sitting on the dining room table. She carried them into the kitchen before going upstairs. The next afternoon, Holden walked into her office, holding a bakery box from her favorite place. "I messed up." She looked up. "You did." "I don't even have a good excuse." She accepted the box. "I know." He waited. She opened the lid. Neither of them said anything else. A few days later, Camille reviewed the quarterly travel reports. One itinerary caught her attention. Nashville, Chicago, Boston, Paris. She found Holden's name first. Her eyes moved to the line beneath it. They stopped. Vanessa Sinclair. The project description referenced commercial real estate meetings across Europe. Every approval was properly signed. Every receipt matched. She closed the folder, set it on the approved stack, and reached for the next report. Late that evening, Holden walked into the kitchen while replying to a text. He slipped the phone into his pocket the moment he saw her. "Hey, everything okay?" "Yeah." He kissed her forehead. "I've got one more email to finish." He carried his coffee upstairs. Camille stayed behind, clearing the dinner plates. She picked up hers, then reached for Holden's. It was still full. She stood there for a moment, quietly scraped the untouched food into the trash, rinsed the plate, turned off the kitchen light. As she reached the staircase, she heard Holden's voice drift from the home office. A few quiet words, a pause, then a soft laugh. Silence followed. She stood there for a second, then continued upstairs. She didn't ask who had called, and he never offered. The company kept growing. So did the distance between what people saw and what quietly kept everything working. Holden spent more time on airplanes than in conference rooms, investor meetings, industry conferences, television interviews. His calendar stayed full weeks in advance. Camille's never seemed too empty. Managers called when shipments disappeared outside Memphis. Payroll failed on a Friday afternoon. A longtime vendor suddenly stopped answering calls. Nobody stopped to ask whether those problems belonged to her. They simply looked for Camille. One Tuesday morning, the human resources director appeared in her doorway. "I'm sorry to interrupt." Camille looked up from a stack of contracts. "You never interrupt." The woman hesitated. Marcus's wife went into labor 3 weeks early. Camille immediately recognized the name. The overnight warehouse supervisor. "He refuses to leave because we're already short-staffed." Camille stood. "Tell him to go. He says he doesn't want to let everyone down." She smiled. "The warehouse will still be here tomorrow." An hour later, Camille was wearing a safety vest and walking the loading floor herself, while another supervisor drove in from across town. When Marcus returned 3 days later, he quietly stopped by her office. He held out a photograph. "My daughter." Camille smiled. "She's beautiful. I wanted you to meet her." She looked up. "You should be introducing her to your family." He laughed. "I already did." He slipped the photo back into his wallet. "Thank you." After he left, Camille sat for a moment before returning to work. The notebook resting beside her keyboard stayed closed. Weeks later, a contract dispute threatened one of the company's biggest deliveries. 3 department heads gathered outside Holden's office. His assistant looked apologetic. "He's in Denver." One manager sighed. "Where's Camille?" 10 minutes later, they were seated around her conference table. Everyone talked at once. Camille listened. Then the room became quiet. "What do we do?" someone finally asked. For the first time, she didn't answer. She looked down at the notebook beside her hand. Her fingers rested lightly on the worn leather cover. She didn't open it. After a few seconds, she looked back up. "I think." Another pause. "We solve today's problem before we worry about next month's." She picked up a legal pad. "Let's start with what we know." The room relaxed. An hour later, they had a temporary supplier, a revised delivery schedule, and every customer order still on schedule. As everyone stood to leave, one manager smiled. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Camille shook her head. "You just watched us figure it out together." He smiled. "Our company always does." The words stayed with her long after the room emptied. That afternoon, Holden called from the airport. "How'd the vendor situation go?" "We worked it out." "We?" She smiled. "The people who were here." He laughed. "I knew you'd figure it out." She almost told him the managers hadn't looked for him first. Instead, she asked, "How was Denver?" He spent the next few minutes talking about investors, expansion plans, and a keynote dinner. She listened quietly. When he finished, she smiled. "I'm glad it went well." After the call ended, she looked at the silent phone for a moment before returning to the contracts waiting on her desk. Late Friday afternoon, one of the company's regular truck drivers finished a delivery and stopped outside her office. He held his cap in both hands. "I was already in town." She looked up. "And I wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "My wife." He smiled. "When she had surgery last year." "Oh, you made sure my insurance stayed active while I was gone." Camille searched her memory, then remembered the paperwork. "I was just doing my job." He shook his head. "No, you called every week." "I never forgot that." He tipped his cap and quietly headed back toward the loading dock. Camille watched him leave. Across town, a television mounted inside a hotel ballroom showed Holden accepting another regional business leadership award. Back at headquarters, employees finished shutting down for the evening. David switched off the hallway lights, one by one. Only one office remained lit. Camille's. As he passed her doorway, he smiled. "Good night, Ms. Reynolds." She looked up from a stack of invoices and returned the smile. "Good night, David." The elevator doors closed. Her office light stayed on. The problem started with a phone call. It was nearly 7 in the evening when the payroll director knocked softly on Camille's office door. "I'm sorry." Camille looked up from her laptop. "I thought you'd already gone home." "So did I." The woman stepped inside and closed the door. "I think we have a problem." She placed a folder on Camille's desk. "The employee bonus account." Camille opened it. The balance didn't make sense. She refreshed the report, looked again, then opened the transaction history. One transfer, large enough to empty nearly the entire account. She frowned. "There has to be another ledger." "There isn't." "Who approved it?" The payroll director quietly slid another page across the desk. One signature, Holden Carter. Camille looked at the date. 3 weeks earlier. The same week Holden had told her he needed to spend several days in Europe meeting commercial property investors. "I checked with accounting twice," the payroll director said. "They both came to the same answer." Camille nodded once. "I'll take it from here." After the door closed, she remained still for several seconds. Then she opened the supporting documents. Hotel invoices, airfare, private transportation, restaurant reservations, Paris, Florence, Lake Como. Most of the charges were attached to business meetings. Some weren't. One receipt caught her attention. A private dinner overlooking the lake. 2 guests. The approval packet listed the accompanying consultant, Vanessa Sinclair. Camille didn't react. She simply closed the folder. Outside her office, the building had grown almost silent. She walked downstairs to the finance department. How much is missing? The controller gave her the number. She nodded. When do bonuses process? Tomorrow morning. If the account isn't restored. The controller hesitated. They won't go out. Camille thanked him and walked back upstairs. She closed her office door, opened her banking app. For a long time, she stared at the screen without moving. Then, she transferred the money. Every dollar needed to restore the employee bonus account. The confirmation appeared a few seconds later. She printed it, attached it to the payroll file, placed the folder neatly in the outgoing tray. Her cell phone buzzed. Holden. She let it ring once, twice, then answered. Hey, he said. I'm running late again. I figured. You still at the office? Yes. I'll explain everything when I get home. Camille looked through the glass wall of her office. Employees were beginning to leave for the evening. Some laughed as they walked toward the elevators. Others talked about weekend plans. None of them knew how close they had come to losing the bonus their families were counting on. You don't have to rush, she said quietly. You sure? I'm sure. After they hung up, she reached into her desk drawer and took out her father's notebook. She rested it on the desk. For a long moment, she simply looked at the worn leather cover. Then she opened it. Her eyes stopped on a page somewhere near the middle. The audience never sees the words. After a while, she closed the notebook again. She didn't cry. She didn't call Holden back. She didn't begin rehearsing another conversation that might help him understand what he'd become. Instead, she picked up her keys, turned off the office lights, locked the door behind her. As she walked past Holden's dark office, she didn't slow down. For years, whenever he stumbled, Camille had quietly stepped in before anyone else noticed. That night, for the first time, she left without asking herself how to protect him. She only made sure the people depending on the company would wake up the next morning with what they had earned. Then she walked into the parking garage alone, carrying the notebook under one arm. And the first decision she had made in years that wasn't about saving her husband. Camille didn't become louder. She became quieter. The Monday after the employee bonuses were restored, she arrived before anyone else. The office was still dark. She unlocked her door, placed her father's notebook beside her computer, and opened the first storage box the accounting department had delivered over the weekend. Inside were 15 years of corporate records. She reached for the oldest binder, the original partnership agreement. Her fingers paused over two signatures. Holden Carter, Camille Reynolds. She smiled without meaning to. She remembered the afternoon they signed it. Holden had pushed the papers toward her. We're doing this together, he'd said. If one of us ever starts forgetting that. He laughed. The other one has permission to remind us. She closed the binder. For a moment, her hand remained on the cover before she gently placed it to one side. The next folder contained photographs from the day they bought the Belmead mansion. Holden stood on the front porch, holding an oversized ring of keys above his head. The roof leaked. The paint was peeling. Neither of them cared. On the back of one photograph, in Holden's handwriting, were 5 simple words. Our forever starts here. Camille traced the faded ink with her thumb, then carefully returned the photograph to its sleeve. The third file held board resolutions from the company's earliest years. Every major decision carried 2 signatures, not because company policy required it, because Holden had insisted on it. One handwritten note in the margin caught her eye. No important decision should belong to only one of us. She read it twice, then quietly turned the page. That afternoon, she met with the attorney who had represented her father for decades. His hair had turned completely white. His handshake felt exactly the same. He noticed the stack of files she carried. I was wondering when you'd come. You were? He smiled gently. Your father always said you never asked for help until you'd already done the hard part yourself. Camille set the files on his desk. I think I've reached the part I can't do alone. For nearly 2 hours they worked through the records together. When something wasn't clear, she said so. When a document reminded her of a conversation, she shared it. Slowly, the files stopped feeling like paperwork. They became a history of promises, some kept, some forgotten. Before she left, the attorney closed the final folder. What do you want from all of this? Camille looked toward the window. I want the people who trusted us to stay protected. And Holden? She was quiet for a long moment. I've spent years trying to protect him from the consequences of his decisions. She rested her hand lightly on the partnership agreement. I'm not sure that's protecting him anymore. The attorney nodded once. I'll begin reviewing everything. The meetings continued quietly over the following weeks. Independent board members requested historical records. Outside auditors asked for additional documentation. Everything remained professional. Everything remained discreet. Inside the company, nothing appeared different. Holden noticed none of it. His days were filled with interviews, expansion plans, and travel. One afternoon, he stopped outside Camille's office. I've been thinking. She looked up. We've earned the right to trust ourselves a little more. She waited. I don't think the board needs to be involved in every decision anymore. Camille closed the folder in front of her. If that's how you see it. He smiled, hearing agreement where there wasn't any. I knew you'd understand. After he walked away, Camille opened the partnership agreement once more. She looked at the two signatures, held the page for a few seconds, then quietly closed the binder. She placed it beside her father's notebook. Late Friday afternoon, an independent director stopped by her office. Without a word, he placed a sealed envelope on her desk. I think you should read this before next week's board meeting. Camille looked at the envelope, then at the notebook beside it. She slipped the envelope into her briefcase. She didn't open it. The conversation happened on an ordinary Wednesday. Holden came home earlier than usual. Vanessa wasn't with him. There was no argument waiting inside the house. Camille was standing in the kitchen, watering the small herb garden she had planted years earlier beneath the window. He loosened his tie. We need to talk. She turned off the faucet. Okay. He stayed standing. She noticed that. Whenever something important happened, he usually sat beside her first. Not today. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Holden looked down at the hardwood floor. I've been honest with myself. Camille waited. I should have done it sooner. She rested both hands on the counter. Go on. He took a slow breath. I've fallen in love with someone else. The words settled quietly into the room. No raised voices. No broken dishes. Only the soft hum of the refrigerator. Camille lowered her eyes for a moment. When she looked back up, she searched his face. Not for an explanation. For the man who once laughed beneath a crooked chandelier and promised they would build everything together. She couldn't find him. Vanessa? She asked. He nodded. I'm sorry. A long silence followed. Then he spoke again. I've already talked to an attorney. I thought you might have. He looked relieved that she wasn't arguing. I think a divorce is the right thing. Silence settled between them again. He mistook it for agreement. It was grief arriving so quietly, neither of them recognized it yet. Holden picked up his car keys. When he reached the front door, he stopped. The house is in my name. Another pause. I think it's best if you're gone before I get back. The front door closed. A few seconds later, she heard his car disappear beyond the gates. Only then did Camille move. She walked upstairs. Not quickly, not slowly, simply one room at a time. The living room came first. Her fingers brushed the picture frame on the mantel. Two exhausted newlyweds sat on the hardwood floor, eating pizza while rainwater dripped into buckets around them. She smiled, only for a heartbeat. She walked into the dining room. Two coffee mugs still sat beside the sink from breakfast. One had been hers. One had been Holden's. She rinsed them both without thinking, then stopped. The water continued running for another second before she reached back and turned off the faucet. Upstairs, her hand rested on the staircase railing they had sanded together over 3 weekends. She remembered Holden laughing because they had somehow managed to stain each other's hands more than the wood itself. In the kitchen, she gently touched the herb pots beneath the window. The basil had grown taller than she realized. Life had quietly continued, even while something else had been disappearing. Finally, she returned to the bedroom. She pulled a small storage box from the closet. Inside, she placed her father's notebook, a framed photograph of her parents, her father's fountain pen, nothing else. She looked around the room one final time. The furniture stayed, The paintings stayed. Even her wedding dress remained in the back of the closet. She closed the box. Outside, she placed it carefully on the passenger seat. She closed the driver's door. For the first time since her father died, she cried. No one was there to hear her. No one hurried to comfort her. She let the tears come until there were no more. Several minutes passed. Eventually she lifted the lid of the box. Her hand rested gently on the worn leather notebook. She didn't open it. She closed the lid again, wiped her face, started the engine. In the rearview mirror, the Belle Meade mansion grew smaller with every turn. Camille never looked back a second time. Vanessa arrived the following morning, carrying a folder filled with renovation ideas. She stood in the foyer and slowly looked around. It's even prettier during the day. Holden smiled. I told you. She wandered into the living room. What do you think about opening this wall? He studied the room. It'll make the whole house feel bigger. She nodded. And the kitchen? He laughed. I already called an architect. She looked surprised. When? Yesterday. You don't waste time. I've waited long enough. For the next hour, they walked from room to room. Paint samples covered the dining table. Floor plans stretched across the kitchen island. Vanessa suggested replacing the staircase railing. Holden rested his hand on the polished wood. He was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head. No. She looked at him. I thought you wanted everything new. I do. His hand lingered on the railing another second. Just, not this. He couldn't have explained why, so he didn't try. By late afternoon, the architect arrived. They walked through the mansion discussing possibilities. A larger kitchen, more natural light, a glass wall overlooking the backyard, a wine room. Holden smiled. I want this place to feel like the beginning of something. Across town, Camille unlocked the door to a small furnished apartment. The living room held little more than a sofa, a bookshelf, and a small kitchen table. She carried in one box, nothing else. She unpacked slowly. A framed photograph of her parents, her father's fountain pen, one coffee mug. Finally, she placed the worn leather notebook in the middle of the kitchen table. She filled the mug with hot water, rinsed it, dried it carefully, then placed it inside an otherwise empty cabinet. She closed the cabinet door. Her phone rang. The chairman of the board. She answered. Good evening. The independent review has been completed. I understand. The board has scheduled a special meeting for next week. I'll be there. The call ended. Camille wrote the date on a small calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. Then she quietly returned the pen to the table beside the notebook. Meanwhile, Holden and Vanessa sat together on the back patio, watching the sun settle over Belle Meade. Vanessa leaned against his shoulder. What should we do first? He smiled. I've been thinking about that. She waited. I want to invite everyone over. When everything's finished. A big dinner. Friends. Business partners. A fresh start. She reached for his hand. I'd like that. His phone buzzed on the patio table. He glanced at the screen. Corporate Counsel. A second notification appeared. Chairman of the board. He looked at them for a moment, then turned the phone face down. It can wait. Vanessa lifted her glass. To new beginnings. He touched his glass against hers. To the future. The following afternoon, an architect stood in the middle of the kitchen with a notebook in his hands. He looked around the room. The worn, hardwood floor, the old cabinets, the window above the sink where sunlight still reached the herb garden. He smiled at Holden. Where would you like us to begin? Holden looked around the kitchen one last time, then smiled. The kitchen. The excavator crashed through the front corner of the roof. Wood splintered. Glass exploded across the driveway. Dust rolled over the front lawn. Holden slammed his SUV into park before it had fully stopped. What are you doing? He jumped out and ran toward the construction fence. Stop! That's my house! No one stopped. A foreman looked in his direction, then calmly signaled for the next section to come down. The machines kept moving. Behind him, Vanessa climbed out of the passenger seat. Holden. He never looked back. He pushed through the open construction gate. A worker stepped in front of him just as part of the front porch collapsed onto the driveway. Sir, you can't be in the work zone. Then stop tearing down my house. The foreman finally walked over, carrying a clipboard. We're operating under a valid demolition permit. I don't care about your permit. This property isn't yours to demolish. The foreman studied him for a moment. I think someone else can answer your questions better than I can. He turned and walked away. The excavator started again. The sound echoed across Belle Mead. Only then did Holden notice the black sedan parked beneath the old oak tree across the street. Camille sat behind the wheel. She wasn't crying. She wasn't smiling. She simply watched. Holden crossed the street, almost at a run. What happened? She met his eyes. What happened to my house? Before she could answer, 2 company security officers approached. Dark suits, leather portfolios, professional expressions. The older man spoke first. Mr. Carter. Holden barely looked at him. Not now. I'm afraid it can't wait. The second officer held out his hand. We'll need your company-issued phone. My phone? The older officer handed him a sealed envelope. You've been instructed to review these documents immediately. Holden looked at the envelope. Then at Camille. Then back again. His cell phone vibrated. Chairman of the board. He ignored it. A second call appeared. Corporate counsel. Vanessa stepped closer. Holden. Her voice was almost lost beneath the sound of breaking timber. What's happening? He never answered. His eyes remained fixed on Camille. You knew about this? She held his gaze. Before either of them spoke, the excavator drove forward. The steel arm crashed through the kitchen wall. The window above the sink shattered. The herb garden disappeared beneath falling brick. Without thinking, Holden took one step toward the house, then stopped. For a brief second, he wasn't seeing broken glass or collapsing walls. He was seeing 2 young newlyweds sitting on the hardwood floor, sharing a pizza from the box because there wasn't any furniture yet. He heard Camille laughing after smearing paint across his shirt. He remembered her standing beneath that very kitchen window, insisting fresh herbs always made a house feel lived in. The memory vanished beneath another deafening crash. Holden looked back at Camille. You knew. A long silence passed. Finally, she nodded. Yes. He looked down at the unopened envelope in his hands, then back at the house. This isn't over. Camille's expression never changed. No, it isn't. Holden stared at the documents in his hands, then back at Camille. I don't understand. You will. His voice rose. No. Explain this. Camille glanced toward the mansion. Another section of the roof disappeared beneath the excavator. She looked back at him. Do you remember the first time my father invited you to dinner? Holden frowned. What does that have to do with this? He asked you one question. Silence. He asked what kind of leader you wanted to become. Holden's expression changed. You told him that if people trusted you with their future, you'd spend every day trying to deserve that trust. She lowered her eyes for a moment. I believed you. So did he. Holden looked down at the documents again. Camille, what is all of this? My father made those decisions long before either of us knew we'd ever meet. He searched the pages. The Belle Mead estate, the family company, the trust, the signatures. His breathing slowed. You knew. I've always known. You never told me. Camille met his eyes. You never asked. Another crash echoed behind them. Dust drifted into the afternoon sky. Holden looked at her in disbelief. Why? Her answer came without hesitation. Because I wanted a husband. A long silence. Not a man who stayed because he felt he owed my family something. Vanessa looked from Holden to Camille. Neither of them noticed. Camille continued quietly. When the board asked who should become chief executive officer, I recommended you. I wanted us to stand beside each other. I wanted you to feel exactly what you were. My partner. Holden looked back at the papers, then at the mansion, then at Camille. His voice had almost disappeared. So, The house was never mine. Camille shook her head gently. It was our home. Those aren't the same thing. Before Holden could answer, the chairman of the board walked across the street, carrying another envelope. 2 independent directors followed a few steps behind. The chairman stopped in front of Holden. The board meeting has concluded. He handed him the envelope. The independent forensic audit is complete. The findings confirm repeated misuse of company funds. Holden looked up. No. The board has voted unanimously to remove you as chief executive officer, effective immediately. No one spoke. The chairman gave a respectful nod, then stepped away. The street grew quiet, except for the sound of the excavator. Holden looked down at the documents, then slowly lifted his eyes to Camille. You trusted me. She didn't answer. She simply looked at him for a long moment, then turned, walked to her car, opened the driver's door, and quietly drove away. Holden remained standing beside the broken remains of the house they had once called home. For the first time, he understood that losing the company wasn't the hardest part. He had already lost the only person who had trusted him completely. The phone started ringing before Holden reached his SUV. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He let it ring. Another call followed, then another. Reporters had already learned about the board's decision. He switched the phone off. Vanessa was waiting beside the passenger door. She searched his face before she spoke. What happened? Holden looked at the envelope still resting in his hand. I don't work there anymore. She frowned. What do you mean? The board removed me. She waited for him to tell her it was temporary. He never did. What about the house? Holden looked across the street. The excavator had gone quiet. Only broken brick, shattered glass, and twisted beams remained where the mansion had stood. It's gone. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Vanessa asked the question that had been sitting between them all afternoon. Was any of it ever really yours? Holden opened his mouth. Nothing came out. She looked toward the empty property. I thought we were starting a life together. So did I. His voice barely carried. She studied him for a long moment. There was no anger in her expression, only disappointment. She reached into the back seat and picked up the overnight bag she had brought that morning. I think I should go. Vanessa. She gave him a tired smile. I don't think I'm the person you need right now. She closed the door, requested a rideshare. A few minutes later, another car pulled quietly to the curb. Before getting inside, she looked back. I hope you find what you lost. Then she was gone. Evening settled over Belle Meade. Construction crews packed away their equipment. One truck after another pulled onto the road. The orange safety fencing fluttered quietly in the breeze. For the first time all day, there was silence. Holden stepped through the opening in the fence. No one stopped him. There was almost nothing left to protect. He stood where the front door had once been. He tried to picture the living room. Instead, memories arrived. Camille laughing with a paint roller after accidentally streaking blue paint across his white shirt. The two of them eating pizza on the hardwood floor because every chair was still wrapped in plastic. Her excitement over the tiny herb garden beneath the kitchen window. The anniversary dinner she planned every year. The bakery box she accepted after he forgot. The employee bonuses she quietly replaced without ever telling him. None of the memories had anything to do with money. He wandered toward what had once been the kitchen. Near the broken foundation, something caught his eye. Half buried beneath dust and splintered wood was a cracked terracotta herb pot. He knelt, brushed away the dirt with the sleeve of his jacket. One small basil leaf still clung to the broken stem. He closed his eyes. One sentence echoed quietly in his mind. Because I wanted a husband. For a long time, he simply remained there, holding the cracked pot in both hands. When he finally stood, he slipped it carefully into his coat pocket. He looked across the empty lot one last time. Then he turned and walked away. Monday morning arrived without cameras, without reporters, without speeches. Camille parked in the same employee lot she had used for years. She carried only her shoulder bag and her father's worn leather notebook. The building looked exactly the way she remembered. The same brick entrance, the same glass doors, the same company logo she and Holden had once approved together. For a moment, she simply stood there. Then she walked inside. The receptionist looked up from her desk. A warm smile spread across her face. "Welcome back, Ms. Reynolds." "Good morning, Lisa." The elevator doors opened. By the time Camille reached the executive floor, word had quietly begun to spread. Nobody announced her arrival. Nobody needed to. A warehouse manager walking past her office slowed. "Morning, Ms. Reynolds." "Morning, Tom." He hesitated. "My daughter's starting college next month." Camille smiled. "Congratulations." He nodded. She wouldn't be going if those bonuses had never arrived. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled. "I just wanted you to know that." He quietly continued down the hallway. Camille stepped into her office. Everything looked familiar. The bookshelves, the framed photographs, the morning sunlight reaching across the desk. Then her eyes stopped. Holden's nameplate was gone. There was no empty space where it had been. No replacement, only polished wood. She looked at it for a moment, then quietly set her bag down. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in." David stepped inside carrying a small toolbox. "I heard you were back." She smiled. "It's good to see you, David." "You too." He nodded toward a cabinet near the window. "I figured I'd finally fix that hinge." "It still sticks?" "Every winter." He tightened 2 screws, opened the cabinet, closed it again. "There." He started toward the hallway, then paused. Without turning around, he said quietly, "This place always felt like yours." Camille looked around the office. She didn't answer. David smiled to himself, then continued down the hallway. A few minutes later, another gentle knock. A young accountant stepped in carrying a stack of payroll reports. "I'm sorry to bother you." "You aren't." The young woman placed the reports on the desk. "I just wanted to tell you something." Camille waited. "Whenever things went wrong, you always made us feel like we'd figure it out." She smiled nervously, then quietly left. The office became still again. Camille opened the top drawer of her desk. Inside rested her father's notebook. Beside it lay his old fountain pen. She closed the drawer. Without opening the notebook, outside her office, phones rang. Printers hummed. Someone laughed down the hallway. Another ordinary Monday had already begun. Camille opened the first contract waiting on her desk. She picked up her father's fountain pen and quietly went back to work. It was nearly closing time when Lisa called from the front desk. "Ms. Reynolds?" "Yes?" "There's someone here asking to see you." Camille glanced at the clock. "Who is it?" He said his name is Daniel Brooks. The name sounded familiar. One of Holden's oldest friends. They had shared holidays, business dinners, birthdays. Camille looked toward the window for a moment. "Send him in." A few minutes later, Daniel stepped quietly into her office. He looked older than she remembered. He held his cap in both hands. "Thank you for seeing me." Camille motioned toward the chair across from her desk. He sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel looked down. "I saw Holden last week." Camille waited. "He's not doing well." She said nothing. "He lost the company." "I know." "He lost the house." "I know." Daniel swallowed. "He lost the apartment after that." Camille's expression didn't change. "He's been sleeping in his car." Silence settled between them. "He finally sold his watch." "The one your father gave him." His voice grew quieter. "He said he couldn't keep looking at it." Camille lowered her eyes for a moment, then looked back at Daniel. "What do you want from me?" He answered honestly, "I don't know. He asked me to tell you." "Oh." Daniel stopped, then quietly tried again. "He said he's sorry." Camille remained still. "He said he finally understands." Daniel looked around the office. "He says he didn't lose the company. He lost himself long before he lost everything else." The room grew quiet again. Daniel finally looked directly at her. "I think he just wants a chance to tell you himself." Camille folded her hands together on the desk when he introduced another woman as his future. "While I was still his wife. Where were all of you? Daniel froze. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't sound angry. She sounded tired. You were his friends. You came to our house. You watched our marriage disappear. Her eyes never left his. Where were you? Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked down at the floor. For a long time he searched for words that never arrived. Finally he whispered, I don't have an answer. Camille nodded gently. I know. Another silence settled between them. This one felt different, not uncomfortable, simply honest. Daniel stood. Before reaching the door, he turned back. There's one more thing. Camille looked up. He still talks about you. She listened, then quietly opened the top drawer of her desk. She rested her hand on her father's notebook. After a long moment, she closed the drawer again. The woman who would have gone looking for him. She paused. Doesn't exist anymore. Daniel lowered his head. I understand. I hope he becomes the man I believed I married. Her voice remained calm. I truly do. But I can't become that woman again. Daniel nodded slowly. There isn't anything else I can say. He quietly left the office. The door closed behind him. Camille sat in silence for a moment. Then she opened the next file waiting on her desk. She picked up her father's fountain pen and began reading. Spring arrived quietly in Nashville. The company had settled into a familiar rhythm again. Orders were steady. New employees filled offices that had once stood empty. People smiled more often in the hallways. Problems still happened. Deadlines were still missed. Machines still broke. But whenever something needed to be solved, no one rushed to protect a title. They worked together. Late one morning, Camille was reviewing quarterly reports when someone knocked softly on her office door. Come in. A young operations coordinator stepped inside, holding a notebook against her chest. I'm sorry to interrupt. You aren't. The young woman smiled nervously. I've been working on a decision. Camille closed the report in front of her. What kind of decision? I've been offered a promotion. Congratulations. Thank you. She hesitated. I'm afraid I'll disappoint people. Camille leaned back in her chair. My father used to tell me something. The young woman waited. If you're making every decision trying to protect your own position, you're probably making the wrong decision. The young woman nodded slowly. Camille smiled. Protect the people. The work usually follows. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the young woman smiled. I think I know what I need to do. I'm glad. She thanked Camille and quietly left the office. The door closed. The room became still again. Camille opened the top drawer of her desk. She lifted out the worn leather notebook. The edges of the pages had softened after so many years. She rested it on her desk. For the first time since her father placed it in her hands, she opened to the very first page. His handwriting filled only a single line. The right partner doesn't take your strength, they multiply it. Camille read the words once, then smiled to herself. She gently closed the notebook. Outside her office window, the afternoon sun settled across the Nashville skyline. A soft knock came again. Ms. Reynolds? Yes? The same young employee stood at the door. I accepted the promotion. Camille smiled. I thought you might. The young woman laughed. I also wanted to ask. Do you have a minute? Camille looked toward the chair across from her desk. The same chair where her father had once sat. The same chair where Daniel had quietly carried an apology that came too late. She nodded. Of course. The young woman stepped inside. Camille set the notebook beside her father's fountain pen, then gave her full attention to the person sitting across from her. Outside, another ordinary workday continued. Inside that office, her father's legacy quietly continued too, not through a building, not through a title, but through every person who left her office believing they mattered. The door closed gently behind them. Before we go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you were in Camille's position, could you ever trust someone again after everything she experienced? And if you were in Holden's place, What do you think was the exact moment he truly lost everything? Was it the day he lost the company, the house, or the moment he stopped seeing the value of the woman who had always stood beside him? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them every day, and some of the best conversations happen there. If this story stayed with you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who believes that real success is measured by how we treat the people who trust us. And if you're new to Greer Stories, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, we share emotionally honest stories about love, family, second chances, and the quiet decisions that change lives forever. Until next time, thank you for spending your time with me. Take care of yourselves, and take care of the people who still believe in you.